Today, we're diving into the story of how a single building in upstate New York became this incredible engine for American social reform and, at the same time, the center of a conflict that literally tore its community apart. It's a wild story, so let's get into it.
So this is it, the Nine Partners Meeting House. I mean, it looks pretty peaceful, right? But its walls hold this intense history of both really radical ideas and, well, deep, painful division. This was a place that helped kickstart the abolitionist and women's rights movements, but it was also ground zero for a schism that just shattered its own community. So here's the quick timeline of what we're looking at. It all starts with the meeting house being built back in 1780. Then comes this game-changing boarding school in 1796, and it all leads up to a dramatic split in 1828 that they called the Great Separation. Okay, part one, a foundation of influence. So you have to wonder, how did this community get to be such a big deal in the first place?
Well, to really get this scale here, you have to realize that by the late 18th century, this one little corner of New York had the largest group of Quakers anywhere outside of Philadelphia. So yeah, this wasn't some tiny outpost. It was a thriving, really influential hub, and it was drawing in families who wanted to build a life around their values.
And this is the statement piece they built. What's absolutely wild is the timing. They put up this huge, permanent brick building in 1780, smack in the middle of the Revolutionary War. Think about that. While the whole country is in chaos, the Nine Partners Quakers were putting down these deep roots, basically saying, we're here to stay and we're going to thrive. And they did not skimp. The final bill was over 800 pounds, way more than they'd planned. So this wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of the community's wealth and just how invested they were in creating a center for their faith and their lives. You can actually see their values built right into the architecture. I mean, the design is pretty simple, but check out this key feature, that huge movable wall. It allowed men and women to hold their business meetings separately, but equally. It's a direct reflection of that core Quaker belief in equality. Part two, the Reformers' School. Okay, so the meeting house was just the beginning. Next, this community built something that would help change the entire country, a truly revolutionary boarding school. Yep, just 16 years after building the meeting house, they take their next big leap. They open a school right next door, and for its time, it was radical. It welcomed both boys and girls as boarding students, which was a first for the whole state of New York. And this school was a big deal, a major building right next to the meeting house. This shows you that education wasn't just some afterthought for them. It was a central part of the Nine Partners community. They were all in on shaping the next generation. And the philosophy of this school was just light years ahead of its time. Boys and girls got the exact same education. Anti-slavery ideas weren't just a single lesson. They were a core value baked right into the curriculum. And get this, no hitting students. They used moral persuasion instead. So here's the crucial point. The school's real legacy wasn't just what it taught, but who it created. The ideas that were nurtured inside these walls would eventually be heard in the halls of power all across America. And just look at the people who came out of this place. We're talking about Lucretia Mott, an absolute giant in the women's suffrage and abolitionist movements. She was a student and a teacher here. Daniel Anthony, the father of the icon Susan B. Anthony, he was educated here too. This school was a direct pipeline to the front lines of social change. Part 3, Seeds of Division. But even as the school's influence was spreading nationwide, back home, the community itself was starting to crack. You see, unlike some other Quaker groups that kept to themselves, the Nine Partners community was successful. They were involved in trade. And all that interaction with the outside world brought in new ideas, especially these evangelical concepts that just didn't sit right with traditional Quaker beliefs. And that created some serious tension. And pretty soon, the conflict split into two main camps. On one side, you had the Hicksites. They were more liberal, really focused on the inner light, that idea of a direct personal connection to God. They were the ones really pushing for social reform. And on the other side, you had the Orthodox. They were the traditionalists, influenced by those big evangelical revivals, and putting more weight on the Bible. Part 4, the Great Separation. So these tensions just kept building and building until they couldn't be contained anymore. The whole thing finally hit a breaking point, and it led to a formal, really painful split. In 1828, it became official. They call it the Great Separation, and it formally split the Nine Partners meeting right down the middle. The very community that had built so much together was now forced to divvy up everything they owned. And the split was absolute. The more progressive Hicksites got to keep the original meeting house and the cemetery. But, and this is a huge twist, the more traditional Orthodox group got control of the engine of influence, the boarding school. It was so bitter, the Orthodox folks actually went and built their own separate meeting house just down the road.
Part 5. A legacy divided. So what happens then? What's the lasting legacy of a community that's just been torn in two? Let's take a look at the aftermath and the influence that somehow managed to stick around. Well, the split really hurt them. Both sides struggled, and the Quaker population in the area just started to shrink. The boarding school finally closed its doors there in 1863, moved, and eventually became the Oakwood Friends School. The original meeting house survived, but its congregation got smaller and smaller over the decades. But here's the key takeaway, and it is so important. The physical community might have broken apart and faded, but its core ideas, they were already out there in the world. The real, lasting legacy of Nine Partners wasn't the buildings. It was those revolutionary ideas of equality and justice that they taught their students, who then carried that fire into the huge national fights for change. And that leaves us with a pretty deep question, one that's just as relevant today as it was back in 1828. The story of Nine Partners shows that pushing for really radical change can sometimes break the very communities that believe in it. So how can any group push for transformation without losing the unity you need to actually make it last? It's a tough one to think about.